Hey, what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change the rear brake pads on a 2018 GMC Yukon. Now the first thing we need to do is remove these two caliper slide pin bolts. That's a 13mm socket. You could also use a 1/2 inch, which will also fit. Sometimes these slide pins will want to spin on you. Looks like this one is. You can see that right there is turning. If that happens, you need to grab an open end wrench and put it on there to hold it in place while you break that loose. That's a 20mm open end wrench. I'm just gonna zip these off real quick with my ratchet here. You can see these are covered in Threadlocker, and that's really what makes it difficult to take them out. There we go. All right, and then we can take off our caliper here. It's a good idea just to hang this from something. I'm just gonna put this little hook up here just so that it's not dangling from the brake line. And then we can pop out our old brake pads. See how that's shiny right there with that little noisemaker or squealer? That was starting to scratch on the rotor, and that's what let us know that it was time to get these changed. We're not changing the rotors this time or resurfacing them. A little bit shiny, but that's okay. In this case, the owner just wants me to put pads on. I'm also going to replace these clips here, these abutment clips or pad retainer clips. Luckily, our new kit comes with new ones. It's always a good idea to change them. Now, if you don't get new ones, you can also just clean these up with a wire brush and reuse them if you have to. Before I put these new clips in place, I'm going to use a wire wheel to clean this area. This is the wire wheel that I'm using. It's kind of a softer bristle, but it does a good job of cleaning everything in here. And just make sure you do wear some safety glasses when you're doing this. Of course, this is a lot easier to do if you take this bracket off, but we can still get it clean enough for what we need. Now, the other thing I'm going to do, I've noticed a lot of people lately are putting a little bit of the caliper grease in these little channels or underneath those clips. Now, you really don't want to use much here. That will prevent rust from getting up underneath there, and they call that rust jacking. I guess it's a bigger issue back east where you guys get a lot more rust. Just make sure you don't get any grease on the rotor itself. There we go. I also like to put a little bit of this grease where the pads ride as well. So I'm just gonna do that before I put it on. It's a little bit easier. And then these just snap in place. Same thing with this one here. Just kind of using the excess grease on my finger. Put a little bit in there. I'll get a little bit of grease on the ends of the pads too. Now remember, when I say a little bit, I do mean use that stuff sparingly. If you use a lot of grease, you'll attract a lot of brake dust. I'm also gonna pull out these slide pins. Just gonna clean these off. This is just old dirty grease. Sometimes I'll put it in once or twice to get as much of that old grease out as possible. And same thing, we're gonna use some more of this Sil-glyde. And I'll just use a clean part of my glove to kind of smear that around. It doesn't really take much grease. We've got trapped air inside here where it's pushing back out. So you do kind of just need to be mindful of that and kind of ease that back in, pulling back on that boot a little bit. Essentially, you're trying to burp that air out. Just remember, if these bind up or if they push out like that, these will end up dragging the outside pad. So I guess on these, the trick is kind of push in on that boot a little bit and then push the slide pin in. There we go. That's how you want it. Now, these aren't bound up or anything, but that grease in there, you can just tell it's really gotten real dirty. So we'll just wipe as much of that out as we can. Put some new grease on there before we put it back in. Perfect. Okay, here's our new pads. And this is our inboard pad, the one with this little tab on it that scratches on the rotor. And I usually put a little bit of grease on the back of the shim here, just a really thin layer. You can also put it right here on the face of the caliper, just where it makes contact. For whatever reason, that small amount just seems to dampen some of the noise. Same with our outside pad. Just a thin little layer of that grease, and then a little bit at the ends so that it can slide in and out of this little channel. you know, as the pads wear down, they do need to be able to move back and forth. And even as you brake and apply the pressure and release the pressure, you don't want these to bind up. Anything that binds up in there is just going to end up with the brakes hanging up and overheating. All right, now we need to push the caliper piston back in here. But before we do that, it's a good idea to pop the hood and take a look and make sure that you've got enough room in your master cylinder, because essentially you're going to be pushing the brake fluid backwards through the system up into the master cylinder reservoir. The other thing you could do is you could crack open the bleeder screw here and let the brake fluid out rather than pushing it backward. That's fine too. In this case, we're just pushing it backwards through the system. All right, so here's our brake master cylinder reservoir, and you can see that the level, it's well below the max. It's actually closer to the minimum. A lot of people ask me if you need to take this cap off of the master cylinder. You really don't. Any trapped air inside here will still be able to escape. I usually like to leave the lid on now that I've learned that brake fluid absorbs moisture, and that will degrade the brake fluid over time, even the moisture in the air. And so the less exposure to air, the better when you're talking about brake fluid. If this were full or someone had been topping it off, you may need to take the cap off and suck some of that old fluid out, either with a turkey baster, some sort of a syringe. There's lots of different tools, or you can also just roll up a few paper towels and put them in there, and that will also wick the old fluid up and out. Now we know we have enough room to push this caliper piston back in. I'm going to unhook that. I'm just going to hold it down here so you can see it in the camera. All you have to do is just grab an old brake pad, and then you put this in, and then you just turn it. It works similar to a C-clamp, and all that's doing is just pushing that caliper piston back in to make room for that new thicker pad material. As you do this, it's a good idea to just kind of watch that rubber boot. Make sure that it's not going to bind or crease or crack. All right, that'll do it. Okay, and then we can just put this right back over those new pads and just kind of hold that in place while we get these two slide pin bolts started. Sometimes you have to pull back a little bit on the slide pin to get that to line up. Just getting that snug real quick. And then the torque spec that I found online for these was 38 foot-pounds. And I'm just using this gear wrench, torque wrench. This is the 85062. It's a good torque wrench. Here you may need to use a 20 millimeter open end to hold that in place. And you're done. Now just remember, before you drive off, it's important that you step on the brake pedal a few times. Don't press it all the way to the floor. That can damage the seals in your master cylinder. Just press it down about halfway a few times until it feels firm. What that's doing is pressing these pads back out, or pushing the caliper piston back out, pushing the pads up against the rotor where they need to be. And remember to get everything torqued to spec. Double check your manual on that. 38 is just what I found online. Also remember to double check the level of fluid in your master cylinder as well before you drive off. Hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description to some of the parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.